Welcome, everybody, to another edition of the Inside ND Sports Podcast. I'm Tyler James, and I'm joined once again by the one and only Eric Hansen. Together, we cover Notre Dame football, recruiting, and more for InsideNDSports.com on the Rivals Network. Notre Dame limped into its second bye week with a disappointing 31-23 loss at Clemson, in which the offense continued to struggle. Quarterback Sam Hartman had arguably the worst passing performance of his Notre Dame tenure, and the Irish seemed to be running out of answers offensively. Our answer on the Inside ND Sports Podcast was to reach out to two-time Notre Dame quarterbacks coach Peter Vaas to get his thoughts on all of it. Peter, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure, Tyler. Eric, how you guys doing?
Doing well.
I'm doing great.
Great.
So first off, Peter, are you surprised that Notre Dame's passing attack hasn't been more dynamic with Sam Hartman?
I guess my answer to that is no, not really. Number one, the passing game is probably the most complicated part of football today, the most sophisticated, and it takes a while to get used to it. And I saw Sam play, it's probably going on back to now 2 or 3 years ago when he was at Wake. And one of the things about Wake's offense is different than most others. As I remember, it had that elongated zone read to it, which led to a tremendous amount of play action passing. And so when you make an adjustment, it takes time. And there are a lot of factors that probably go into the adjustment Sam had to go through and probably is still going through. So is it a surprise? No, not really. They've had a lot of success. The other thing that I did when you guys asked me to speak here or talk, be interviewed, whatever we want to call it, is I went and looked at his statistics. And you guys are much more statistic oriented than I am, but I'm going to probably round off these numbers. At Wake, over the full body of work, he threw 100 touchdown passes and 40 interceptions. Now, in my third grade math, that's about 2.5 to 1. Well, at Notre Dame so far, he's 18-7. Now we'll graduate and go to the fourth grade math. That's still about 2.5 to 1. So Sam is what he is. And, the offense is a little bit different. The offense is probably developing as the season goes, experimenting a little bit. Some experiments are good, some experiments aren't. So to answer your question in a long-winded way, no, it's not a surprise.
Okay, we will term what you're doing with us as enlightening us. So
I appreciate the compliment.
Okay. So, Peter, you have been an offensive coordinator, you've been a quarterbacks coach, running backs coach, I think tight ends coach. You've had sometimes sharing those positions and so forth. But when you're purely a quarterbacks coach, and you see your quarterback going backwards, and at least his confidence and performance we can make the case for as well. How do you go about addressing that with that quarterback? How do you go about fixing that?
I think you do a couple of things. And let's just talk about philosophically coaching in general. There are a lot of people that believe in the tough love thing. A quarterback position to me, and right, wrong, or indifferent, has always been a little bit different than that. A quarterback is somebody that has to be held in esteem by everybody else. He's the leader. You have to see him as a leader, and you have to treat him as a leader. So to get to the meat of your question, what do? You remind him of what he does well, and then you return to fundamentals. And then in the course of a game or a practice, you play to his strengths. You rebuild his confidence. You remind him of what he has accomplished. You remind him of how he's gotten there, and you return to that. And to be perfectly honest with you, here's an interesting sidelight, because things have changed so much. And since you used the word, I'll steal it. I've become enlightened in the last 10 or 12 years since I've been away from it, in the sense that one of the things that's very prominent in coaching today is a private quarterback coach. Tom Brady went to a private quarterback coach forever. One of the things I would ask and it's one of those rhetorical questions. Does Sam have one? And my question, and the reason I bring it up, is he was used to a system for 4 or 5 years. I believe he was at Wake for 5 years. And now he's coming into a system that Gerard is probably feeling his way through it and trying to develop it a little bit. Does Sam have a constant that he leans back or falls back on? Is it his dad? Is it his high school coach? Is it the current quarterback coach at Wake? Has he been encouraged to talk to those people? Has he been encouraged to do something on a bye week to get away from it a little bit or to return to his roots? All those types of things enter into the mental makeup and the confidence level of a quarterback. And without confidence, without a sense of security, a quarterback is going to struggle. They may not appear to be high-strung individuals, but they obviously have a very strong ego, and you've got to make sure that ego is on the right page.
I'll inject something before Tyler asks his question. If the Wake Forest staff is advising him this week, they will be in big trouble because they play Wake next.
Touche. You're absolutely correct. That particular fact eluded me as I made that answer, but you're right. Wake is on the schedule this week, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah, next week. Yes.
Peter, one thing that seemed apparent to me, now obviously I don't know the progressions, I don't necessarily know the play calls, but watching Sam against Clemson, it looked like he had maybe some impatience in going through his reads, and early on I think he was just sort of throwing the ball downfield in some situations where he could have held on the ball, and then the pass protection sort of fell apart on him and he didn't have a lot of help from there. How do you make sure a quarterback, when he is getting maybe frustrated, and I think this has been a frustrating stretch, you mentioned he has 7 interceptions, those have come in the last 4 games. How do you get a quarterback to sort of settle down and sort of trust what he's been doing, even if it hasn't been working the last 4 or 5 games?
You challenge him in a quiet way. You remind him of the success he's had. You make an attempt in your play calling to give him some short, easy completions. You do all those things that are going to, quote, make him feel good. One of the things that is Notre Dame, and that's probably why Sam chose to go there when he had other choices, from what I understand, is that you're constantly in a fishbowl. You have to relish that opportunity, that challenge. And it's certainly a challenge, because you know as well as I do that when things are going bad, it's tough to maintain your composure. And so you have to remind him constantly, whether it's on the headset, whether it's by sitting down next to him on the bench. It has to come from more than just one individual. It's not just the quarterback coach. It's Gerard, the offensive coordinator. It's Marcus, the head coach. It's his teammates. It's everybody around him that needs to show faith and confidence in what he's doing at that particular time.
Peter, I'm going to throw this out to you because, again, you've coached at a lot of different levels and, again, had a lot of different roles. But some people in our fan base suggest, hey, why not play one of the younger quarterbacks the rest of the season, bench Sam Hartman? And what would that do to your team dynamic if you did that, do you imagine?
I would think that it would send a message of some sort, and I can't predict that message would be, but my fear would be that it would be a message of we've given up. We're building for the future. The next 2, possibly 3 games, in likelihood 3 games, don't mean anything. So I think it sends the wrong message. One of the things that is incredibly important in the game is that the only thing that matters is the next game. It doesn't matter if you're 0-11. When you go to play that 12th game, you better play it to win and you better play it to compete. If you're 11-0, you better go play that 12th game to compete and to play as well as you can. It doesn't matter what's happened before. It's the next challenge in front of you. And for Notre Dame right now, the next challenge is to think about Wake. They can't afford to start thinking about Stanford or start to think about, all right, are we going to go to Minnesota for the bowl game, or are we headed to Florida for a bowl game? You got to focus on the here and now. And that's Wake Forest this Saturday.
Peter, I think in the middle of the season when Sam Hartman's struggles started, it was coincided with Notre Dame losing some receivers to injury. And I think I think Sam Hartman, from the fan base, and I think from many of us who cover him, was sort of given the benefit of the doubt. It's like, well, he's dealing with a lot of wide receiver issues. But I think the longer this has gone on, it's like, well, okay, you know who your wide receivers are. You sort of have to deal with what you have. I guess, can you just sort of quantify the impact it would have on maybe not trusting your receivers and not having the playmakers at the wide receiver position to bring that success for a quarterback?
I certainly will. And Sam's been around long enough to maybe have heard this, maybe have experienced it, maybe figured it out of his own. But I know when I was in Canada, I had who's currently a Hall of Fame quarterback in Canada, a young man by the name of Tracy Ham. And I remember during practice, I said to Tracy, why are you throwing the ball there? That's not where the read takes you. And he looked at me and he said, Coach, I got to find out if I can trust him. If I can't trust him on Tuesday, I'm not throwing to him on Saturday. And that becomes a big part of it. That's why Tom Brady, Julian Edelman, and everybody worked in the offseason. That's why Sam was there last spring and this summer developing a rapport. And he did that so well because of his character. If I'm not mistaken, he was chosen as a team captain. That's a difficult thing to do in a short period of time. Probably going to become more prevalent as time goes on in college football today. But to answer your point, or your question, it makes a huge difference. First, you have to have confidence in yourself. Then you have to have confidence in those around you. And once that's broken, it's tough to regain. And what regains it? Success. Throwing completions, having somebody make a catch they're not supposed to make. Those types of things. And it becomes a confidence level. And it's not easy because confidence is gained through repeated successful opportunities.
Peter, I'm going to follow up on Tyler's question with regard to the wide receivers. The last two games, the guys receiving the most reps in the wide receiver group have been freshmen. In fact, the Pittsburgh game, number 1, 2, and 3 were freshmen. And I'm wondering, by and large, we'll throw out the freak, Michael Floyd type freshman, but by and large with freshmen, what's the challenge of, being an effective, productive, consistent player in the offense as a freshman wide receiver?
Maturity. One of the things that scares the heck out of me about college football today, and I mentioned part of it, and that's the private coaching, and you guys are on the Rivals Network and the Rivals 5 Stars and all those types of things, is that young people coming out of high school have just had a tremendous amount of success and they feel entitled. And as a result, when that position, that playing time, those balls aren't thrown to them right away, what happens? They tend to pout. So the answer to your question is maturity. Are you mature enough to fight through and show what you really can do? Because as well as I do, coaches are going to play the best players, and coaches don't make the decision as to who the best players are. Players do by how they practice and how they perform in practice. And so for young people to be stepping forward like that is a testament to the University of Notre Dame in itself, in the sense that they attract quality charactered people that have that maturity level. And it obviously has to do with the culture of hard work that's taken place there.
Peter, I think there's all kinds of different criticisms that's fair or unfair when you look back at a game. It's like, well, this didn't work, so obviously that was a bad plan. But I think the thing that seems at least universal in my opinion is that Notre Dame hasn't used play action enough. I'm curious, do you think it's possible that there's a good explanation for that? Could it be, can you have quarterbacks that aren't comfortable with play action? Could there be some other rhyme or reason to that? It just seems like an offense that's built on a running game should be able to have a pretty good play action game to go with it.
And I will be honest with you, I probably have seen a handful of Notre Dame plays all year long because of the distractions that I am involved with on Saturday. I'll put it that way. But the answer to your question is it would be a little bit confusing. Number one, earlier in this conversation, I mentioned that Sam came from a predominantly play action kind of offense with the elongated zone read and a lot of RPOs that took place off of that. which an RPO is just a choice of a play action type of play anyway. So I would think in today's game and with the running game, yes, play action ought to be a big part of what you're doing. And then I would think Sam would be very good at it. It helps make your offensive line better. There are a lot of things that go into it. So now the question is, why not? It becomes then a question of what is the game situation? Are we reverting to a empty set, drop back pass type of offense right in the beginning? Have we established the run? Different things along those lines. And then it goes into what is the comfort level of the play caller? Because like everything else, when it gets nitty gritty, what's the play caller going to do? He's going to revert to what he thinks is fundamentally sound and what is his base. And so it takes a while for a play caller to adapt. And I certainly know absolutely nothing about the circumstances of Gerad Parker becoming the offensive coordinator. And so I don't mean this as a slight at all, but my guess is that happened kind of late last year into the winter, into the spring. How much of this is Gerad's? And one of the things that are very difficult to do is to have to speak to people and think, more importantly, in a different language. If this is an offense that Gerad inherited and he's been asked to implement it, he's doing it with one hand tied behind his back. And that makes it very difficult. So without knowing all of those situations and what's gone into it and how much they've tried to mold the clay, it becomes difficult to really answer it. But that has a lot to do with it. It seems that with a strong running game, a strong play action quarterback that was quote unquote recruited by a different coordinator, that you'd have thought that play action would have been a big part of their offense. Yes.
Peter, I'm going to phrase this more in the hypothetical, theoretical realm. So again, you've been an offensive coordinator before, and people sometimes, let's not just Gerad Parker, but people have criticized other offensive coordinators here at Notre Dame for not adjusting at halftime or not adjusting during the game. Realistically, how much of that actually goes on during a game, and is it more challenging for a young offensive coordinator to do that than somebody that's had a lot of experience?
I don't know if it's more or less challenging. How much of it goes on? I don't know if it's a question of all of a sudden you go into at halftime and draw up a new play or two. It's a question of emphasis. And if you're a Notre Dame fan, you'll recognize this analogy. Lou Holtz's offense didn't change a whole heck of a lot from the time Tony Rice was the quarterback to when Rick Meyer became the quarterback. Tony Rice was an option quarterback, and Lou was very much an option coach. But when Rick became the quarterback, he became much more, maybe an exaggeration, but he threw the ball more than he did with Tony. But he still ran the option. And my point being, the offense didn't change, the emphasis did. And so at halftime, I think there's an assessment of what have we done well, what have we done poorly, and where do we need to go forward in the second half. You eliminate thoughts more than you add them, and you change your emphasis a little bit on the success or the failures that you've had in the first half and try to accentuate the successes. And maybe there's something that was in your game plan that you didn't get to in the first half, that God darn it, this was a great idea on Tuesday. It's in the game plan. Let's use it in the second half. And now all of a sudden it looks like an adjustment where it was really just an emphasis. But very rarely are new plays created at halftime.
Peter, in your experience, how much impact does a quarterback's coach have on sort of the passing attack and game plan? And I guess to go with that, how much do you think should they have an impact on it?
It depends upon whom they are. I know I've been fortunate enough that I've coached at the college level and I've coached at the professional level. And the difference in the coaching is at the college level, you're much more of a dictator. At the professional level, you're much more of a facilitator. Now, having said that, Sam Hartman's now in his sixth year. He's at the point where you'd like to be a facilitator with Sam and get some input. You certainly want to know what he's comfortable with and what he's uncomfortable with. If you don't know that, then you're liable to call a lot of things that he's uncomfortable with. But that conversation should take place during the course of the week. I don't believe the quarterback is involved with the game planning itself, but as all these plays are put up on the board or put down on a piece of paper, the quarterback should have an opportunity to go, what do you like? What don't you like? What do you like in this situation? What don't you like here? And the play caller needs to be extremely sensitive to that, which all goes into the idea of playing to his strengths and playing to the things he has confidence in.
I'm curious too, Peter, when you were a head coach, and I realized the budget at Allegheny and Holy Cross and maybe even NFL Europe was limited on how many assistants you had. But ideally, when you hired for those positions, did you marry the offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach into one position? Or did you prefer to have those separate, somebody coordinating the offense, somebody coaching the quarterbacks?
And I guess this is where I reveal part of me more than I reveal part of a philosophy.
Okay.
I can't ever remember. There was only one time in my career where I was the offensive coordinator and was not the quarterback coach. And even as the head coach, I was always basically the offensive coordinator and head coach, because I think they go hand in hand. I also think, and this is just a little peculiarity of my own, that to really get into the head of a quarterback, you need to have been a quarterback. There are a lot of people out there that don't fall into that mold, but I think that has an awful lot to do with it. If you are going to be the offensive coordinator, I do think you need to have somebody that can interpret what the head coach is saying and is the go-between to give some of that softer love than the tough love that may come from somebody else with a background at a different position, or a head coach with a background at a different position, that type of thing. So I do think quarterbacking experience is a big plus in coaching the quarterback position.
Peter, sort of, I guess, expanding on that. I mean, Marcus Freeman is a defensive coach by trade, and he's a head coach. So I know he's leaned on the offensive coordinators to sort of help him with things. How does he go about problem solving when you have a defensive coach as a head coach trying to help the offense? And how difficult is that? And in your experience, have you met a lot of defensive coaches that really have good offensive minds, or just because they're sort of practicing against it? I'm curious, like what do you find in a defensive coach that could be like, okay, he could help out with the offense as well?
I think an awful lot of it depends upon where are you in your career. When I first started coaching, I thought the gentleman, Sam Timer, that I worked for, had a great offensive mind, very basic, very fundamental, and he was historically a defensive coach, but he's been around for a long time. I'm drawing a blank now, because there was somebody else that I thought, oh, heck, there it is. The dumbest thing I could possibly. Lou was like that. Lou's background was basically a defensive coach, and Lou would spend most of his time on the offensive side. You need to have an incredibly strong defense to win, but offense is where the game is played. Quarterback position is where the game is played. The offensive line is critically important. All those things, we can go on and on and on. But for Marcus, it has to be a challenge, because he's feeling his own way as a head coach right now. He hasn't been around for a zillion years. He has to almost put blind faith in the offensive coordinator that he has. Yes, there have to be some philosophical parameters that he's given, and I will personalize it a little bit. When I was at Holy Cross as the head coach, we're in game 1 or 2 of my career, and I start getting on the phones and talking to the defensive coach, and probably in a little bit of hut terms, and he simply said to me, he said, Peter, if it's going to be like this, it's going to be a long season. And so basically what he was saying was, Peter, shut up and leave me the hell alone. So I did. And the only things I've ever done since then with defensive coordinators is try to walk out of the room and maybe walk in on a Monday or Tuesday and give us a suggestion from something I've seen. But you have to have faith in the hire that you've made, and then let them do what you've hired them for. If you keep interjecting you upset his flow. So there's a fine balance there that most of that conversation has to take place on Sundays and Mondays. And then as we get into the flow of game planning and the game itself, it's just got to flow.
Peter, my last question before we ask you what you're up to is this. You know, you were around Notre Dame years ago, so a lot's changed in college football. But when you look at that program, do you think it's still possible Notre Dame can compete for and possibly win a national championship?
Yes, and I'm going to make probably a little bit of a controversial statement here. I certainly don't know all the ramifications. I'm like any other lay person out there that just reads the papers and what you guys report. But part of the situation we are in now came down to money, from what I understand. And in having said that, when Notre Dame let Tyrone Willingham go, Notre Dame made the decision, we are now going to compete at the big time college level. We're going to do what it takes to win at the national championship level. And if you're committed to that at Notre Dame, money should never be an issue. Should never be an issue. So do I think they can? Yes. Why? Because I think in today's day and age, with the transfer portal the way it is, that they have an opportunity to attract enough quality charactered people and enough quality charactered excellent football players to win. Is it going to be easy? No. It's getting harder and harder and harder. And one of the things from afar that I seem to think is taking place, and not that you guys know that much about it, but in NFL Europe, we used to have a new team every year. We used to have a new set of players. We used to have to put a team together in 3 weeks. And one of the things that's taking place now at the college level is you have 40 or 50 new faces every single year. You don't get much carryover as far as team goes, which goes back to the fantastic job Sam Hartman did to become a leader of that team in the short period of time, and what Marcus has done. But can they win it? Yes, they can. Is it going to be easy? No. And to quote Lou, what was Lou's standing joke? When I first came, they told me they wanted me to win. Then they said, no, you don't understand. We want you to win them all. No, you don't understand. We want you to win them all by a lot. So expectations keep rising, keep rising, keep rising. And when the dust settles, Notre Dame should be very, very proud of what's going on out there. There are kids that are working their tail off and working hard. And does the ball always bounce that way? No, their way? No. Will it someday? Yes.
Peter, before we let you go, can you catch us up on what's keeping you busy this time of year?
All right, you won't believe this one, but I am the supervisor of replay for the Southeast Conference, the Sun Belt, and the Southern Conference. So every Saturday, the reason I haven't been able to see very many Notre Dame football games or very many plays, I sit in the video center in Birmingham, Alabama, and I watch all the SEC, Sun Belt. Well, don't see the Southern Conference. I just evaluate those or provide feedback to the replay officials during the week. In fact, I'm working tonight at 7 o'clock. I'd have to go look to even tell you who's playing tonight. Yeah, but there's a Sun Belt game that's on, and I'll be looking over the shoulders of the people that are working it. Louisiana and Southern Miss play tonight. So
we'll have to get you for a seminar on targeting sometime.
Good luck. that is more elusive than Hoyt Wilhelm's knuckleball.
Well, all right, Peter, that's all we got for you. We really appreciate you catching up with us and sharing your insight, and hopefully you don't have too many controversial calls tonight.
Exactly. Guys, I appreciate it. Thank you, and anytime we can.
Before we get to our questions segment, I wanted to remind our listeners of a new promo we're offering for InsideNDSports.com. We have a 30-day free trial available to our podcast listeners who want to try out a subscription to the site. That will get you access to all of our premium content, the Insider Lounge message board, and you don't have to wait for the next podcast to ask us a question. You can take advantage of this offer by using promo code NDPOD. That's NDPOD when you sign up for a subscription on InsideNDSports.com. You can also find a link to the deal in the podcast description or show notes. All right, now it's time for questions. You can submit questions to us on Twitter or the Insider Lounge message board before every podcast. I'm at TJamesND, and Eric's at eHansenND. First one I have for us is from our pal Marie Biafore at Biafore_Marie. What grade would you give the offensive play calling for the Clemson game? Can you explain why every first down in the first half they ran the ball? How about a little element of some play action or something else? Also, do you feel Jordan Faison should have had more snaps? Although no player had the hot hand on Saturday, he was the closest one to doing anything. I thought we could maybe hold off on the Faison thoughts because our next question's about him as well, but I wanted to at least give Marie credit for asking a good question about Faison.
Okay, so I would give the offensive play calling a D based on 3 of 14 on third and fourth down, having to settle for 3 early field goals when TDs could have tilted the whole complexion of the game. Also based on the final 6 drives, which netted a total of 60 yards and ended in 4 punts, an interception, and a turnover of downs. I also figure into the grades that Audric Estime only had 3 carries in the second half. So those would be my grades. And then without getting into Faison, why was there every play in the first half running the ball? I have no idea.
I mean, I think some of that was they were having success doing it. But I'm in total agreement that that's why I asked Peter about the play action. The play action thing has been the most confounding thing to me. That
right, and Clemson had some injuries with some very young players playing in the secondary.
Yeah, and you're sort of wasting the success that you're having with I mean, Notre Dame specifically, it was this pin and pull play that they were doing different versions of it where they were pulling multiple guys. And why isn't there a play action pass off of that? I mean, Pro Football Focus had Notre Dame running 2 play action plays. I couldn't find the second one. I only think there was one that was a very obvious one where it was sort of a fake handoff. And Hartman had pressure in his face as a result, but he dumped it off to Holden Stays, who ran, I think it would end up being like a 7-yard completion. That was the only real play action play I thought Notre Dame ran. And that was not off of that look they were doing with the pulling guards and stuff like that. So my grade was a C-. There seemed to be, upon further review, watching the game a second time, I think there were things available in the passing game early that Sam Hartman just wasn't reading out, or at times the pass protection was failing him. And so I improved my grade. Like I understand what they were trying to do. It just wasn't working. And even on some of those third downs, like I think 2 of the third downs that led to field goals, it's like the play was there. It just wasn't made. And obviously the play caller has to take some responsibility for that. I'm not trying to take it away from him, but it at least makes my grade less harsh. So the C- is where I came in at there. And we'll talk some more Faison here with this question from Joshua Williams at Osh W 1372. Since the wide receivers at the top of the depth chart aren't making consistent plays anymore, what do you think of making Faison a priority in the offense? I feel like he should be getting at least 15 touches with his playmaking ability. Bring back the bubble screen.
Not sure I would put a number on touches or reps for him, but I think more involvement makes sense on the surface. He was the second highest rated player on either side of the ball for Notre Dame in the Pro Football Focus grades. He had 18 snaps in the game. Where it becomes a math problem of sorts is he timeshares with Chris Tyree, who is playing well and who is showing signs of a growth spurt himself. So you would conceivably give up Chris Tyree reps to increase Faison reps. And then Jordan Greathouse's natural position is also slot receiver. He's playing out of position at the boundary receiver, getting reps there with some injuries. So again, I think it's more of a math problem, but the fact that he's playing well and he's fast and he can get open, I would try to think of ways that I could get him involved.
Yeah, 15 touches seems like a pretty high number for a receiver. I understand you can certainly get him the ball with some jet sweeps. I think, I don't know why like every other play isn't like Chris Tyree and Jordan Faison just running in jet sweep motion, even if they're not getting the ball. Like, use those guys as decoys more often. Like,
Right.
if you're so stuck on having to run the ball a lot, like give the defense more to think about. Then I just think that Faison needs to be more involved. Like 18 snaps does not seem like enough. I not wouldn't go as far as the 15 touches, like I mentioned. But you're right with the the algebra of it all. It's like, how do you figure out how to get these guys all snaps when your best two receivers right now, I would argue, are guys that play the same position. And you're really playing without a lot of size if you got both of those guys on the field at the same time. So that's a tough like sacrifice you have to make. But I think at this point, I mean, what have we seen from the other guys that makes us like, okay, you have I was in favor of giving Tobias Merriweather more reps, but it's like, well, he's just not doing it for you. And I don't think Notre Dame really took any shots to him before the late attempts to get him involved. But I don't know. It's just like it's a head scratcher. Like I'm not envious of being the one having to figure out, because I don't know what the right solution is, but it does seem like part of the solution needs to be making sure Jordan Faison gets the football sometimes. All right. At Bleachers Bobby with a long list of questions here. What's the shelf life on this? What has to happen for this to get fixed? Is it time to be concerned that long term this might not work out? Is it as simple as hiring a really good not inexperienced offensive coordinator? In your honest opinion, are there problem solvers on the staff? Can they make adjustments?
I think we probably should take these in chunks. I'll start with what's the shelf life on this and what needs to happen for this to get fixed. If you're talking about the shelf life on venting, I hope we're near the end of it. And not singling you out, Bleachers Bobby. It's just, wow, it's been a lot of very disappointed people this week, and it's a lot of the sky is falling kind of disappointment. What happens to get this fixed? I'd say a complete evaluation of the problems on offense. Simplifying didn't do it. I mean, look at the offensive coordinator, look at the scheme, how the offensive coordinator and the offensive line coach interact, offensive personnel, and perhaps adding an analyst in a role that is a former fixer, and then determining whether you think Parker is capable of a huge growth curve. So that's a lot in just that first part of your question. But those are the things that I think would be helpful.
Yeah, I think I agree with all that. I don't know. I mean, what's the shelf life? I mean, as it relates to the offense, I think like it has to be this off season where it gets fixed. I mean, we obviously you want to hope that they can do better things these last two regular season games in the bowl, but I think on a larger scale, like this off season has to be the time where decisions are made, whether it's changes in personnel in the coaching staff or changes in philosophy. I think there's got to be those discussions here soon. Is it time to be concerned that long term this might not work out? I don't know if that's more geared towards the offense or Marcus Freeman in general.
Yeah,
I think I interpreted it more as Marcus Freeman. And I think there's reason to be concerned. I understand the concern. I don't know that it's like reached a point where it's not fixable long term. But I do think we're reaching a point in Marcus Freeman's head coaching tenure where it's like, okay, this is a turning point, or like a fork in the road. It's like, is it going to get better, or are we going to stay on the same path? And I don't know what the answer is for that right now.
So do we want to take the last parts of this question? Are there problem solvers on the staff? Can they make adjustments? I guess I'll take a stab at that.
Sure.
I think there are problem solvers on the staff, just not these problems. I don't know that exists. For example, I think if there were defensive issues, I think there's several people that can fix them. And I think Marcus Freeman can also fix other things like team chemistry issues and
Mhm.
things of that nature. But X's and O offensive issues, I don't know that that person exists on the staff, or at least has the voice to do it or the role to do it. And can they make adjustments? I think that for me, what Jared Parker did in the first 4 games against admittedly only one good defense out of the 4, that he was able, you saw in-game adjustments, you saw halftime adjustments, you saw adjustments week to week. It just doesn't feel like he has a counterpunch against better defenses. There isn't an answer. And so I would say that's where this process has gotten stuck, is making the adjustments.
Yeah, I think it, whether or not there are problem solvers, they're not solving problems. I don't think, and that's all that we can really judge them on, is whether or not they're getting the job done and fixed. I mean, if you do look at some of the things like I mentioned with Sam Hartman's, like what he was doing early in the passing game, he did eventually start like, hey, these guys running drag routes are open, just throw them the ball. He was doing that some, but I mean, I don't. That wasn't enough of a fix to totally get Notre Dame in the end zone. And the other fix was like, hey, just take off and run. Like they're running man coverage, they're leaving all these lanes for you to run. So there were some adjustments there, but I don't know that they were enough. And I don't know who they're coming from necessarily. I don't know who's deciding those things or who's pressing the right buttons. But like in the end, it's just not working together to get them to where they need to be. All right, next one is another long one from Nathan Reynolds at Enforcers 2117. So last year we were ready to run Golden out of town, and this year we are holding our breath and hoping he stays. This year we are ready to run Jared Parker out of town. Should we give him another year to learn the personnel and get more experience? Plus, he improved the backup tight ends behind Mayer from last year. Also, how come we never hear criticism on Joe Rudolph for the O-line play or Chancey Stuckey on how bad the wide receiver play is, and they can't get open? Who is Hartman supposed to throw the ball downfield to? So why is all of it falling on Parker? Do we really want 3 new offensive coordinators in 3 years?
All right, let's break this into at least 2 parts. Let's end the first part right before we get to also how come we never hear criticism on Rudolph.
Sure.
So the comment about wanting to run Golden out of town and holding breath if he stays, Nathan, I'm sure you're maybe more referring to conversations that maybe you've had with your friends or fellow Notre Dame fans or people on our message board, if you're on there, rather than, I certainly wasn't advocating for them to get rid of Golden. I don't know that too many people in the media would have been, if any at all. And then what I would say to that, well, now, they want to run Parker out of town. Shouldn't we give him another year? You can't just extrapolate every situation and apply it elsewhere and expect the same result. So, and I'm not saying run Parker out of town, although I think there needs to be a deep evaluation there. But what I would say is the big difference with Golden and Parker is, with Golden, you have a guy with extensive head coaching experience, NFL and coordinator experience, adjusting in year 2, rather than a guy whose only previous college coordinator experience ended in a demotion. And again, having said that, whether he sees the kind of potential growth in year 2 he'll need from Parker. And so I'm going to end that part there and then get to the other things.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't like arguing that Al Golden needed to be fired. I was disappointed with Al Golden last season. I feel like I was a critic in a way, and it was a combination of, well, the defense was really bad in the red zone, and it gave up some unfortunate scores when it really needed stops. But then, like combining that with his lack of impact as a recruiter, like I felt like those were like it needed to be where it's at now. Like I still don't think Al Golden's making a huge impact as a recruiter for Notre Dame. Certainly, the success of his defense is a good thing for Notre Dame in recruiting, but the defense is great on top of it. Like these issues were solved in that Notre Dame's not getting killed in the red zone like it was last year. So that was the fix. The biggest problem for Jared Parker right now is that his offense fails against good defenses. And so what is the answer for that? Is there an answer for that? And do you have the same sort of belief that Al Golden could fix the red zone issues, that Jared Parker could fix what seems like an even more difficult fix in getting better against good defenses? So I don't know what the answer is for that. And that's why I understand the criticism for Jared Parker. And I think also, like, you got to remember, like, Jared Parker was here, so he knew the personnel. Like, he wasn't new to the staff, whereas Al Golden came in here in February from the NFL. And so maybe that's giving Parker too much credit for needing to know the personnel because he was already the tight ends coach. But and then I would just add, like, his work as a tight ends coach is completely separate from his OC work. I don't know that anyone's criticizing what he's doing as a tight ends coach. So, but offensive coordinator is his most important role right now, and that's why he's being talked about in those ways.
Why don't you go first on the second parts of these questions, and then I'll follow up.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's less criticism for Rudolph. I mean, I don't know. Maybe there is more Rudolph criticism out there. I don't know that I've like levied a ton of criticism his way. He has a track record, whereas Jared Parker doesn't in his current role. So I think there's some of that there. The Stuckey criticism, I think, is fair, but he's also dealing with injuries. He's made some good things happen with Chris Tyree and Jordan Faison being guys that weren't receivers at a high level and making those into guys that you can rely on. But he's obviously hasn't developed and progressed with a lot of guys, but some of that is injury related as well. So I think those are the reasons why they're getting maybe more, or there's a lighter response to the issues that are coming with the play at their positions.
My follow-up is, yes, I agree with what Tyler said. I also would say, if you haven't seen criticism of Rudolph and Stuckey, you haven't been reading our message board or my Twitter mentions. I also think it's harder from the outside looking in to evaluate a position coach simply by stats than a coordinator, because the coordinator success or failures influences that picture so much.
Mm-hmm.
The example I gave on the radio last night on WSBT Sports Beat was Harry Hiestand in his last year at Tennessee. They had a broken offense. He had a lot of injuries and youth in his offensive line. And when Harry said, I'm, going to leave Tennessee to go to Notre Dame, the Volunteer fans, at best, it was indifference. At worst, it was like, bye, see ya. and a Hall of Fame caliber position coach walks out the door and then looks like a Hall of Fame coach at Notre Dame. As far as Chancey, especially, again, Tyler made some good points about dealing with both youth and injuries. I mean, in 12 years, Brian Kelly had 3 wide receivers with double-digit catches. In this year alone, Chancey Stuckey will likely have 3 freshmen with double-digit catches.
Yeah, I was going to say, you didn't say freshman the first time. I wanted to make sure that you got that word.
Freshman. He's got 2 freshmen now, and Jordan Faison is probably going to get there.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is, I don't think you discount recruiting at a high level. Recruiting at a high level is part of the fix for this position.
Right. Yeah.
And so I think you can be a little bit more patient with, even if he was an average field coach, he is recruiting at such a high level that this is going to help you down the road. And believe me, there are going to be people that try to steal Chancey Stuckey away because of that after the season.
Yeah, that's definitely a good point. And Jared Parker's done a good job of recruiting tight ends, but it's Notre Dame. And if you can't recruit tight ends, what are you doing? What are you doing here? So like, I don't know that there's like also like there's not a long list, at least to my knowledge, of recruits that are like, I'm coming to Notre Dame to play in Jared Parker's offense, because that wasn't really a known quantity coming into this season. All right, next question is from @Charles W. Wolf. Is there anything the offense can show in the next 2 games that would change the narrative on Parker?
If the narrative is there needs to be an evaluation done at the end of the season, then no, nothing in these last 2 games will move off the fact that there needs to be a deep evaluation. If the narrative is, can he show growth and evolve into his role next year, then maybe there are signs that would encourage that. I don't think anything conclusive, because again, where the problem's been the biggest is against really good defenses. The Wake Forest is middle of the pack. Stanford is in the bottom 10 in defenses. So there's not the test. Now, maybe if they get into a bowl game, they will face an elite defense, and maybe not. If they face LSU's 88th in the country in total defense, but they're a super, super effective offense.
Right.
So that would be my answer.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to like tackle a narrative because not everyone's narrative is the same. You know what I mean? A narrative is a big catch-all word and pejorative in many senses. So like, I don't think so. I mean, how many arguments or conversations that do you have with fans of sports teams that like change their mind after they feel like they've already made a decision on something? So I don't think there's anything the offense can show in the next 2 games that would change the opinions of some, but I do think there are things that the offense can do in the next 2 games that would show signs of progress, that Jared Parker understands the issues and he has answers for how to solve them. Then the question becomes, well, why did it take so long for that to happen? But I think that's how I see the next couple of weeks playing out if those changes are made. Next question is another one from Marie Biafore. Do you think behind closed doors there will be a shakeup with regards to play calling on the offensive side of the ball? Obviously, anything that happens would not be made public, but is there any chance Gino Guidugli takes more of a role since he has had prior offensive coordinator experience?
I think it's a good question, Marie. I don't know if it's the smartest thing to do to answer that with a yes. Maybe in the bowl game it makes more sense where you can adjust the setup. You know, Gino's been on the sideline, Jared has been up in the box. Do you really want to mess with this? Again, when you're going against 2 defenses that you can beat, I'm not sure, unless you're thinking along the lines that Gino would be the next offensive coordinator.
Right.
I don't know that makes sense at this point.
Yeah, that was my question. Like, to what end? Like, why would you do this? Like, what would be is it something you feel like you need to do in order to beat these remaining teams? Then if that's the case, then why is Jared Parker still here? Like I don't, like, maybe that's just like a loyalty thing where Marcus Freeman wouldn't want to make that move in the season. But if you can't rely on Jared Parker to make the play calls for these last 2 games of the season, then that's certainly not a good sign. And like you said, like what are you learning then if he's not making the play calls, other than whether or not whoever is making the play calls, whether it's Guidugli or someone else, would be fit to replace them? And would anyone be like satisfied if the result of what happens this season is someone else that's already on Notre Dame staff as the offensive coordinator next year? That doesn't seem like a positive outcome for anyone. So I just don't think that it would make a lot of sense to give Parker's play calling duties to someone else for the rest of the season. Next question is from Burt Leonard at Burt2834. Which coordinator from Notre Dame's past would have made the most of this offense?
You know, I did, again, kind of an unscientific study because it doesn't cover all the bases. But what I did was I looked at the offensive play callers, including head coaches that were offensive play callers over the past 20 years. I did this a few years ago, and I updated every year. And the guy that had the best success in terms of producing more yards and more points than a defense typically gave up, and also played the most difficult defenses consistently. This will surprise some people, is Mike Denbrock. Wasn't even close. He was the most successful play caller when you look at just through that lens. I will say, I think Mike Denbrock, who going into the Alabama game had the number one offense in the country, was coaching the number one offense in the country. I think he would do well. I think Charlie Weiss, who was a head coach, but was basically the offensive coordinator and the offensive play caller, with Sam Hartman would do well. And then even though Urban Meyer wasn't the offensive coordinator when he was here at the end of the Holtz era, beginning of Bob Davie era, he did some offensive coordinator-like things in terms of designing plays and even doing some play calls. I would put Urban as a guy that would do well with this offensive personnel.
Yeah, I tried to limit like the scope of my choices to the time I've covered Notre Dame, so that's
to the time you've been alive.
well, you didn't name anyone that was there before I was alive. But since I've covered Notre Dame, that's 2012. Mike Demrock was the first name that I came up with. And in case anyone doesn't know, he is the offensive coordinator at LSU. Eric talked about Alabama. Just in case anyone wasn't following along where Mike Demrock is, right. That's where he's at now. Tommy Rees was maybe my second choice. Like, he certainly would have known the personnel better than Mike Denbrock. I wouldn't choose Rees over Denbrock, but I do think like there's some reasons to believe that he would know how to do this. And I think transitioning the offense he was running into a version that utilized Sam Hartman in his best way would be better because it was his offense. Whereas
right
where Notre Dame's
Peter
at right
even
now,
mentioned Peter Vaas even mentioned that if he Jared was inheriting Tommy Rees's offense, he was doing kind of doing things with one hand behind his back, I think was his quote.
Yeah, and I think that's what it feels like to me is what happened is like Parker is sort of tried to transform Tommy Rees, the offense that Tommy Rees is running. Now, I don't know if Jared Parker was starting with a clean slate, he would do the same thing or not. I don't really know that. I mean, we don't have a track record to necessarily judge that on. So I think I would prefer Rees than Parker in this situation. And that was sort of the extent. Notre Dame hasn't exactly had a bunch of awesome offensive coordinators. I don't know that Chip Long would do a better job with this. Chip Long, I think, maybe was a little bit better with RPOs, so maybe there would be something there. But I think Denbrock, I think, is the easiest answer of this, and he's certainly sort of matched. I know Eric has long been like the study that Eric was talking about. He's always like highlighted and mentioned Denbrock as being underrated, and I think Eric looks pretty smart right now with the way Denbrock is playing or coordinating at LSU right now. All right, next question is from Clan AD on the Insider Lounge. Do you think Sam Hartman played everyone at Notre Dame? I mean, did he sit back after not making the big show after 4 years and say, I am never heading to the NFL, so let's go another direction, get some exposure as the quarterback at Notre Dame, get some NIL money while I can, graduate with the ND degree, and then coach, do TV, etc. I made a comment sometime back that I didn't think a dude that hadn't already headed to the show after 4 years with his stats and was still around for a 6th year was the guy to go after in the portal. Go Irish.
My answer is not in a million years.
Yeah,
and one reason too that he came to Notre Dame was he was not in an NFL style offense.
Right.
He wanted a year of training to be in an NFL style offense, and that's I'll shut up now.
Yeah, I don't think that's fair. So it's his fault that he's pretty? Is that what we're like, because he's getting all this attention because of his looks? Like, we're holding that
don't
against
hate
him?
me because I'm beautiful.
Yeah, like, I don't know. Like, Sam Hartman is a lot of things, but I would never question his like competitiveness. Like, he's a competitor. He didn't just come here to sort of ride out and like accentuate his fame. So I don't buy the premise. I don't know why now folks would all of a sudden like usually staying in college is a good thing. People like that about guys that want to stay in college and make the most of their opportunities. But 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 in this case, it seems like that's being used as an indictment for Sam Hartman. Like, did you think that about Jack Cohn? He didn't sort of have the same sort of NIL and social media presence that Sam Hartman did, but he came to Notre Dame and wanted to better himself as a player and take advantage of the opportunity. Notre Dame's had plenty of guys that have made, not plenty, but they've had a handful of guys that make it to their sixth year. And I don't know that I've ever heard a criticism of those guys shouldn't be here anymore. So I don't buy this line of thinking. Next question is from Jack Quinn at JQ6008. I know it's an obvious hot take, reactionary question, but why not start Steve Angeli the rest of the way? What's the downside? I'm not totally blaming Hartman for Saturday, but see what Angeli can do so you have an informed offseason decision.
So I'll start with the Angeli part of this. The coaching staff, I believe, already knows what Angeli can do. I think anything that he would do against Wake Forest and Stanford's defense isn't going to change that opinion one way or another. Now, had Sam Hartman been hurt and Angeli played against Clemson on the road, maybe that gives you another piece of information that you don't have. But not because you demoted Sam Hartman and have a guy that threw 6 touchdown passes against them last year, benching him and not playing them against this year doesn't make sense. What's the downside? One, you could lose your team. And Peter alluded to this a little bit, is that you're sending them a message. Are you sending them a message that the season's over? If then, why doesn't Joe Alt opt out for the rest of the season then? If these are meaningless games and you're playing for next year, then why should he play the rest of the year? I also think you weaken the allure of getting another portal quarterback or even portal position players if you give up on the team. I think the worst thing that can happen is kind of a team mutiny, something that Brian Kelly faced for a different reason in the 2011 season. I think it also sends a message that you're blaming the players and maybe not addressing what the real issue is, which I still think roots in coaching. And then you also risk losing games, which Notre Dame at this point, I think there's a huge difference in how Notre Dame would be perceived at 7-5 and losing games to Wake Forest and Stanford and being 9-3 going into a bowl game.
Yeah, to me, it's as simple as winning and losing games. Like, you don't play Steve Angeli because he doesn't give you a better chance to win. And if he loses games, that's not good for Notre Dame. That's why you wouldn't start him. That's the downside. I think some of the other things are a little overstated. I mean, I do think, because you can flip the same argument. It's like, well, are we giving up on the season by benching Sam Hartman? It's like, well, if you say, if you're holding everyone to a high standard and Sam isn't doing what is being asked of him, then you could flip that and say, well, we think it's the best thing for us to win by playing Steve Angeli. Now, how many people are going to buy that? Are there enough people on the team that would say, okay, yeah, I agree. We need Steve Angeli in here. That's the difference between what's been happening and what isn't happening in the games that we need. So I think you could sort of skew that. I mean, you could also, like, what's worse for Notre Dame's the perspective on Notre Dame or the perception of Notre Dame as it relates to portal quarterback recruiting. Is it worse to have not gotten the most out of Sam Hartman or to bench him for the last 2 or 3 games of the season? Like, I think either of those things are bad. So I don't think you're playing from a position of strength as it relates to that. So I just think it comes down to winning games, and Sam Hartman gives you the best chance to win games. And that's why he will remain the starting quarterback. All right, next question is from LDL Go Irish on the Insider Lounge. My question is on Zeke Correll. How did he get the concussion? Didn't he have one previously at Notre Dame? How is he progressing? How is the ankle he hurt in August? Didn't he have ankle issues before at Indy? Is that part of the reason he periodically gets pushed back? Did that injury hurt offensive line consistency, especially with 2 new guards?
How did he get in the concussion? Apparently got hit in the head. It didn't come up in the press conference maybe 6-question press conference. It was pretty short. Did he have a concussion before? I believe he had one in the 2021 season that caused him to miss some time. And how is he doing? We'll let you know Monday. But the bye week came at a good time, so he could take the whole week off for concussion protocol and try to move through it. But we'll get the progress report on how that's going on Monday. Let's see. I think one huge positive to come out of the Clemson game was Ashton Craig played extremely well, especially during a time where Clemson kind of knew what was coming offensively. Let's see. Did he have ankle issues before at ND? I can't remember if he did about the ankle. Is that part of the reason he periodically gets pushed back? I don't think the pushback was related to the ankle injury in August. That has happened to him at other times in his career. Some of that size related. Did the injury hurt the offensive line consistency, especially with the two guards? No, they played well together at Ohio State. I mean, I think this is a recent thing. There has not been offensive line consistency in the interior. They've had some good games, and they've had games like Clemson.
Yeah, this line of questioning just felt like trying to find a reason to give Zeke Correll the benefit of the doubt for his play, and none of them line up to me as making sense. Like, if his ankle hasn't been fine, then he shouldn't have been playing. To me, I was when I was reading this, I was like, well, I wonder if he's trying to like draw a parallel between Zeke Correll and Jarrett Patterson, where clearly he was impacted by his injury at the beginning of the season, which was much more serious than whatever ankle issue Zeke Correll was dealing with. But Jarrett Patterson got better as the season went, and Zeke Correll isn't getting better, in my opinion. So if he was dealing with an ankle issue, then he should have been benched at some point and given time to let that ankle heal. I don't think him missing a little bit of time during camp hurt the O-line consistency. I don't know that when those guys have problems, it doesn't seem like they're not playing well together. It's just like they're getting abused, and like that's Zeke Correll's biggest problem is his physical capability of moving guys out of the position. Clemson was playing guys head up on him and making him work for the ground that's in front of him, and he was losing that battle too frequently. I didn't know when the
problems against Duke too.
That's not the first time that Zeke Correll has had struggles. So I don't know when he got the concussion. I didn't go back to try to figure it out. Concussions don't always have to come on a big hit. They can come from a series of hits that come together. So I didn't like watching the game. I didn't know he had a concussion until it was announced on the broadcast. I thought like he might've just got benched because he was playing that poorly. So hopefully can get back and have this concussion issue past him by the time Notre Dame plays again. But that's a position where I think Notre Dame needs to be a lot better. And so either Zeke Correll needs to play better, or that would be a position I would consider making a change at as well. All right, next question is from T Russo 13 on the Insider Lounge. I was curious about your thoughts on Chancey Stuckey. He obviously can recruit. How much blame falls to him about the poor performance of the wide receivers? I would think with the raw material there, he should be able to develop them into something much greater than we have.
Kind of answered this a little bit earlier. Again, injuries to the boundary receivers hurts the whole receiving core. I mentioned freshman production. I mean, if you want to pin Tobias Merriweather on him, I suppose you could do that. I don't know if you had a different wide receivers coach, would Tobias be more productive? I just remember talking to Brady Quinn about Chancey Stuckey. Those two were teammates on the Cleveland Browns, and how much Chancey Stuckey was coaching the other wide receivers on the Browns team, even though he was kind of a borderline guy onto the roster. He made the roster because of his receiver knowledge and X's and O's knowledge. So I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah. I think the one that everyone probably is like, well, if Chancey Stuckey is a good wide receiver coach, why isn't Tobias Merriweather better? I think that's a fair question. To me, from my perspective, it seems like Tobias Merriweather's issue is more of a focus and effort thing than it is not being taught how to do things thing. So like I don't know that I blame a coach for that, right? Like this is college football. It shouldn't be on Chancey Stuckey to motivate Tobias Merriweather into making plays. Obviously the injury issues have impacted the receiver position. He's had a lot of bad luck, so I think that's where some of the benefit of the doubt comes. And I think he got to give him some credit for what Chris Tyree and Jordan Faison have done. Like that doesn't go. You can't just say he's done a terrible job and ignore the guys that are out there making plays for them and the track records that those guys had. Like those guys were nobodies in terms of wide receivers at the college football level, and now they're guys that someone is asking needs 15 touches per game. So I think we got to have some perspective there. All right. Next one is from Baba Ganoush at PLACT_ITFDB. Who/what are your pleasant surprises thus far in 2023, and who/what are your biggest disappointments?
So I'm going to go with 4 players each, and I'm just going to do players. I think we've hit on big picture and coaching disappointments and surprises or whatever.
Yeah.
So I picked 4 guys, all of whom I thought had potential to impact the team, but maybe haven't impacted it much more than I predicted. And that would be Jordan Faison, Rico Flores, Cooper Flanagan, and Josh Burnham. And I went back and looked at my, 20 top 23 players for 23. For example, I had Xavier Watts probably higher than most people, so I wouldn't put him on the surprise list. Although 7 interceptions, yeah, I didn't have that on my bingo card. On the disappointments, I would say these guys would be disappointed. Jordan Botelho, Tobias Merriweather, Zeke Correll, and Antonio Carter II.
Yeah, I was on the same boat. Like I had high expectations for Watts, but I feel like this level is higher than I could expect. So I included him on the surprises. I was also very high on the chances.
But I've been a Watts honk for a long time.
No, I agree. Yeah. I did the same exercise, and I think I was like the highest on Mitchell Evans. So that's, I think, for most people considered a surprise. So I didn't choose him. I would say Thomas Harper. Like I think there was hope that he would do good, but it's like, well, he's like the unquestionable nickel, and there's like he hasn't made every play, but he's been a big part of the defense. Jordan Faison certainly. Disappointments, I think, are probably a longer list. I think it'd be fair. I don't know if I want to include both the guards, but just about everyone on the offensive line outside of Joe Alt. Like I don't know that they've played to the standard that we expected them to. To me, that Correll and Fisher are the ones I had the highest expectations for, and they haven't played that well. I would give Coogan and Spindler a little bit of the benefit of the doubt in that, like, my expectations weren't as high for them. Obviously, Tobias Merriweather's on that list. I think you just have to. Jaden Thomas. I mean, that's injury related in large part, but that was someone I thought would be the leading receiver this season, and he's not. So, I think you could name a lot of receivers and a lot of offensive linemen in terms of the disappointments so far this year. All right, our last question is from SJB75 on the Internet Lounge. Is 2024 recruiting done?
Well, no, because the coach this today are going to hit the road. Tyler had a story on this today that they're going to be out recruiting tonight, Friday and Saturday to finish the bye week. So what are they doing recruiting? I mean, they're looking at 2025s and visiting or watching them, but they're also seeing 2024. So that includes babysitting, trying to make sure that they stay in the class and that they're feel like they're wanted and loved and so forth. And they're also still trying for some flips. I don't know how Tyler can probably speak to the viability of being able to flip anybody at this point, but I do think that they're still in there pitching for that.
Yeah, I mean, the 2024 class might be done in terms of guys who end up signing, but they're not done in terms of trying. I think the guy of the ones that they're trying to flip, Nnamdi Ogboko, the defensive tackle committed to Georgia, I think is at the top of the list in terms of the likeliness of maybe Notre Dame's ability to flip him. I wouldn't say that it's extremely high necessarily, but I do think that there is a chance that could still work out for Notre Dame. And I think you need to spend a lot of energy making sure no one gets flipped out of your class. And so that will be a lot of the effort being done over the next 5 or 6 weeks here before the early signing period. All right, that's it for today's episode of the Inside ND Sports Podcast. If you don't already, you can subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and other popular podcast platforms. If you like what you hear, give us a star rating, leave a review, and share our podcast feed with someone who thinks it's still too soon to put up Christmas decorations. As I mentioned earlier, we're offering a 30-day free trial to our podcast listeners who want to try out a subscription to InsideNDSports.com. So please take advantage of that with code NDPOD. That's NDPOD. This will be the last you hear from us in the podcast feed or on YouTube this week. But we'll be back to our normal routine starting Monday with Football Never Sleeps. And we'll have plenty of written coverage coming your way before then. So stick with InsideNDSports.com for all your Notre Dame coverage needs.